Wow, we are live. This has been some technical trouble. Golly, wow, that's fun. Isn't that fun how that happens sometimes? I actually incidentally thought we were live and was running into some technical problems. We were running into some technical problems, and that's because it didn't actually go live, but it was showing live on my end. But hey, here we are. Here we are. And we're going to get into this shortly. I'm really glad for this. Let's bring the chat on in. Welcome in, chat. This is one of those nights where we have some technical difficulties, and you know what? Just because of this, we're gonna get into the wobbly pops right away in this stream. Holy cow! This is oh wow! I've been talking to the mic for the past 15 minutes, not even realizing that you guys could not see what was going on. This is a first for me, and a very proud moment of a content creator and live streamer that's been doing this for how many years now? Wow, and you guys have been paying attention for how long? Clyde, pay the bills. Yeah, there we go. It says 7 minutes. Well, I've been at it for some time, and I've been doing it so low that you guys couldn't hear me apparently, and that's where we're at. A very low sound. That's been happening to me. This is some tech stuff that's been getting on my nerves about um, Windows 10. Let me fix that right away. Let's get on this and make sure that my levels are adjusted. So Windows 10 recently has started to auto adjust my levels. It should be fine now. Let me know right now how that's going. Um, but nonetheless, here we are. We're here, and I've been reading chats and commenting as if I was talking with you guys for the past little bit. So yeah, that was me. That was me. That was me flubbing the whole launch of my podcast this evening. But hey, you know what? We're gonna make up for it by having a good one, a rather good podcast, because I'm really looking forward to this as I make all the adjustments right now on the fly. Great time to be tuning in because we got some great guests this evening. I'm looking forward to this because, well, one guy you know, and possibly two guys that you know, and one new guy that a lot of you guys know, but I've never actually spoken to personally. And that would be, of course, Frank Vaughan, and I'm excited to bring him on to the channel for the first time this evening. I've watched a bunch of his content. I like what he has to say, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with him, as well as we're going to be having a little bit later in the show Alex Zoltan. You guys know him. He's going to be coming in, chiming in on some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight, and as well as him and Frank might have Wyatt Claypool come join us again this evening. Not sure. He told me if he can make it. That's one of those. He's been on the road, and I'd love to have him in the chat for this particular one. So if he can make it, that would be great. Hoping for that. But let's get into some of these things. G-Meister gifting 5 memberships to the channel. I want to thank you so much. Appreciate that. It looks like that function is working again on YouTube. Speaking of functions working or not, I would like to know from you guys, have you been getting notifications? I've been getting some complaints that notifications aren't going out. People aren't receiving them. They're not knowing what's going on. And it would be good if we can get to the bottom of that one, because a lot of people are telling me, no, I haven't gotten notifications. So let me know in the chat right now. Did you get notified for this, or did you just know to show up? Maybe you heard about it on Twitter. Let me know. Jess M with a 279 super chat. Hi, Clyde. How's life in the US? I'm not in the US. I'm here in Squamish, BC still. We won't be going to the US for a bit of time. We got to do, we're not border jumpers. I'm a US citizen, but my wife isn't. and my kids, we haven't gotten all the paperwork in order and all of that. So we're going to make sure we do things the right way and lead by example. If you want to do immigration, you do it ahead of time. You make sure you're going to the place where you're going legally. It's not that hard a concept. Yeah, it sucks. You might have to stay where you were at for a little bit of time, but you gotta do that. So when I am living in the States, I'll let you know how that's going. But for now, it's getting chilly and it rains a lot. Welcome to beautiful British Columbia, where I call home, and I have for some time. I wanted to get into some of this. Well, particularly, I want to talk at the beginning of the show about free speech, and I wanted to highlight a video that's gone out. I'm gonna have to do this the old-fashioned way because we're doing the old StreamYard thing, but I want to present this screen here. Bring this up now. A lot of people are tweeting this out. Marty up north, in particular, tweeting this one out. Sheila Gunn Reid shared this video to the world, talking about Christine Van Gyn going to. She's from the Canadian Constitution Foundation. She's got an excellent YouTube channel, which I'll be highlighting in a second here. And everybody needs to go over and subscribe to the channel. She does a fantastic job. Bang up job. Here, hey, look at that. Look at that. Look at that. There, that works. So she does a bang up job. But this was a particular thing where there was a heritage committee talking about free speech. And so she gave an excellent speech on this. We'll get into that in a second. Marty up north giving his 2 cents on this one. And why don't we get into this? I'm gonna put it on the sped up because I know my guests are waiting. And I don't want to leave them waiting too long, but this will be a bit of a segue into what we're going to be talking about, as well as some other topics. A lot to do with what's been happening in our elections, whether on this side of the border or the other. That's going to be part of this conversation tonight. Granite Man with the $2 super chat. Selena Caesar Chavanez, huge story, not in Canada. Yeah, we're talking. I was just listening to that. That was with Jordan Peterson, correct? I didn't get past the first 30 minutes. Felt like it was just a lot of introduction to who she is, and I didn't get into the meat of the story quite just yet. But maybe we'll end up talking about some of what that was if some of my guests have more information on it. Yeah, because I haven't gotten on to there. Penny D with the $2 super chat, not receiving like I did. Had to look you up. Okay, well, we'll find out. We're going to try to get to the bottom of that stuff so that we can get notifications sent out. Anyway, let's get into this video. This is Christine Van Gyn sticking up for our right to free expression in Canada.
Thank you for inviting me today. I'm the litigation director with the CCF, which is a legal charity that fights for fundamental freedoms in Canada. And I am fascinated by the question that's been proposed by the committee today, which is the means government should have at its disposal to ensure the exercise of freedom of expression. And frankly, the government does not need more means. The government needs to do less. We already have the right to freedom of expression guaranteed in Section 2B of the Charter. Before the Charter, we had the right to freedom of expression protected in the Constitution Act 1867, which is similar in principle to the United Kingdom, whose unwritten constitution protects the right of public discussion. We are not granted these rights to freedom of expression by our government. We possess them by virtue of being human beings. And throughout human history, it's the government that's the greatest threat to our right to free speech, whether it was the execution of Socrates for his public philosophy, or the brutal Star Chamber of King Henry VII, who punished those who printed without a license, or the attempted censorship of New York newsman Peter Zenger for his criticism of the American colonial government. Governments have tried to censor speech that they don't like as long as we have had governments. And it's hard for me to even know where to start on this question. Do I talk about the threat to freedom of the press? The problem with...
Okay, the first bit there, I just want to stop and comment on, because she's absolutely right. The freedom of speech has always been under attack. This is a relatively new thing that it's been enshrined as a fundamental right for all people to have a freedom of speech. And the default is governments and tyrants trying to get rid of your freedom of speech and tell you can't speak. And as we get into this, you'll realize that our government is no different. It's no different. It's trying that the default position of telling you what should and should not be said, rather than leave that as a fundamental right and let people decide what they think is good to say or not good to say. But that's not a matter of law. The matter of law is that you have the right to say even the most awful things.
Imprisoning people for words alone. The problem with you using rights tribunals to regulate art and comedy, or as Dr. G brought up, how professional regulators are undermining the right of freedom of speech of so many Canadians in those professions. These are all real live issues today, and the source of the problem is government. On free press, consider the Alberta press case, which involved a law that compelled newspapers to publish government rebuttals to criticism. That case was from 1937. So fears about the so-called fake news or misinformation are not new.
Nope.
But even though the Supreme Court struck down that Alberta law, the silencing of the press continues today. For example, we had the CCF challenge an amendment to the Canadian Elections Act it ended up being struck down in 2019. That was a provision that prohibited the false statements about political candidates during an election period, and it even captured innocent statements and mistakes and had fines up to $50,000 and 5 years in prison. We were successful in having it struck down. And while not censorship in the classic sense, millions of Canadians have lost access to news because of this government's Online News Act, done in the name of saving the news industry. The act has backfired spectacularly, with Meta refusing to comply and blocking news on its platforms. There's the Online Streaming Act brought by this government.
Okay, I'm going to get into that just briefly. So the Bill C-18 was a massive backfire. Absolutely. She's totally correct on this. It backfired because the government is terrible at knowing what the consequences of actions are. And this really goes to show that first off, central authorities are just terrible at organizing things, and then they also are incompetent at incompetence. And what they did was they made this prediction that all these businesses were just going to give them money to run news, Canadian news. All these news outlets, they're gonna collect this payola and pay them out with because arbitrarily, just by decree, and that they would just all comply with it. Well, the path of least resistance for any of these businesses was not to pay the money. It was the path of least resistance, which is always the default position. It was to just not allow the news on the websites, and that's where they went. Now, Google made a recent payola, a concession, but it was only a concession insofar as that they just paid the payola and said, okay, can we just get back to business as usual in your country? And they said yes. So, I mean, Google doesn't care to do any of this stuff other than just pay the bribe. It's just a bribe at the end of the day. and it really backfired tremendously, especially with Meta. But yeah, I digress. Let's hear what she had to say.
Which put the CRTC in charge of regulating content from companies like YouTube, Netflix, and Spotify, including user-generated content. And
yeah, C11.
The free press is essential. It's an essential check on the authoritarian impulses of government, and the actions of this government continue to undermine it. On the criminal law power, censorship through criminalizing words is nothing new, even though we're well aware of the problems with it. Consider Quebecois Jehovah's Witness Amy Boucher, who in the 1940s was convicted of seditious libel for accusing the Quebec government of being too close to the Catholic Church. That is a viewpoint that was condemned at the time, but perhaps mainstream today. And consider how expressing the idea that gay people should have equal rights was an unacceptable view 60 years ago, but thanks to the free speech of people who publicly advocated for change, we have equal rights now in Canada for the LGBTQ community.
That's right.
Free speech is important for those who are in minorities, whether they're a minority viewpoint or a minority in some immutable characteristic. Free speech is how we define the contours of our other rights. It is not a value for the right or the left. It is a nonpartisan right for all Canadians, yet this government continues to undermine it.
I'd go even further to say that without free speech, you're able to suppress the majority and make them feel like they're not the majority, make them feel like minorities, because they won't be able to express themselves amongst each other. This is a real thing. Just think about during COVID, how many times you would, censor what you said to even friends of yours that you didn't know if they were towing the line on the thing that we're not supposed to talk about or question or, you know, do that thing. So this, by getting rid of free speech, getting people to self-censor, you're able to manufacture consent largely across the board. So what she's saying reigns true in a lot of ways.
One of the purposes of free expression is to allow for debate on even the most controversial topics, because vigorous debate is how we best settle our disagreements, including disagreements about who should lead government. Free debate on contentious issues can't happen if the people currently in government are allowed to outlaw opposing point of views. The right to express your words and ideas goes to the core of who we are as individuals. The government doesn't need more means. It needs to stop trying to silence speech.
I think that's great. And that wasn't just her in her office. She was actually at the committee testifying for the Heritage Committee. And I thought that was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Well spoken, great message. Marty up north says she's right. I have the right to say whatever the F I want. I'm going to not say that word because I don't know how many kids are around the, you know, parents' iPhones or on a TV at the moment. So there are only two sexes. Residential schools do not purposely kill kids and bury them in mass unmarked graves. Moon landings are real. Communism is a failed ideology. There is no need for separate trans right. I believe Justin Trudeau is a closet homosexual. That's Marty. Baby boomers are most privileged generation in Canada's history. Civil servants are by definition unproductive. Nothing is free. COVID vaccines are I'm not even allowed to say that on YouTube. Frog's ass is watertight. Pineapple absolutely belongs on pizza along with black olives. Thank you, Marty. I definitely agree with that one. Federation is a failed experiment. Danielle Smith is a disappointment. A bowl of cereal is a perfectly acceptable dinner choice. There, I said it. Freedom of speech. I love this. I love the how animated that one was from Marty. But unfortunately, what ended up playing out, and I'm not gonna go through the entire video here of Christine Van Geyn, but I think, you know, she's as excited about these things as I am. I'm very, very excited about liberty. I'm very excited about free speech. And I think, you know, sometimes I naively walk into things, and I think she naively walked into this one a little bit because she thought that everybody in that meeting was interested in talking about free speech. But instead, there was partisanship there, and there was the playing of the partisan games where this one MP attacked her and tried to attack her credibility for no other reason that maybe that MP thought this might be score him political points, or he might be able to make her look bad if she was supporting anyone on the conservative side, which she went into it very much not the case. But anyway, let me share a bit of this with you because this is ridiculous. I'll leave a link for everybody. In fact, I'll put this in the chat right now so everybody can go watch this later. Go check out the whole video because I think it's she put it together very well. So let me just get that in there. So there's the link in the chat there. But let's go over a bit of this
about a proposed niqab ban from the Harper government. Here is that exchange.
Do you think that a woman should be able to wear a niqab?
Of course I do.
Do you think that it was inappropriate for the Conservative government to put forward in the last time that Stephen Harper's prime minister, do you think it was inappropriate for them to put forward a niqab ban on women?
I don't have comment on that. I'm not familiar.
No, but I'm not asking you. So, okay. So you're not familiar with the proposed niqab?
I do not think that government should ban religious clothing.
So you do not think the government should ever ban religious clothing, correct?
I do not think they should.
Okay.
That government is doing that now.
So I hardly remember anything about this Harper era proposal. It was from about 10 years ago. And
okay, she puts it eloquently, like why it was that she didn't have an answer for that, and how off guard she was, because why the heck is he asking about that? We're talking about freedom of speech, but he's playing political points with like the Harper's government tried to do this thing that was against free speech. You must be a Harperite. You must be against free speech. So therefore, we should throw away your testimony entirely. It turned out to be a giant exchange of this back and forth. And I'll show another little clip here.
Right to choose.
Of course.
So he brings abortion into this.
I do.
Do you think that is it
to choose how to access healthcare? You mean like to choose
whether or not she can get an abortion?
Yes,
does it?
That's my personal viewpoint.
Fantastic. Does it concern you? Does it concern you that conservative governments in certain provinces, and does it concern you that members of the Conservative Party are seeking to legislate eliminating or taking away a woman's right to choose?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
I'm asking you specifically if a conservative.
We're talking about abortion right now.
I'm asking you because I'm asking you if you believe in that freedom.
What the connection is.
I'm asking you if you believe in that
order here. What's the relevance to this?
So I really don't know what this MP is trying to do here. I think
I'll tell you what he was trying to do: play political politics games in these committees to try to score points later down the road and try to discredit Christine for possibly her opinions. This is where and I'll leave the rest. I'll leave the rest of it for you guys to go check out, because this was a great video and I recommend it. She gets into all her counterpoints and stuff, but I want to talk about this largely in this frame. The people in our government don't care to talk about free speech. You bring up free speech. They have a committee on free speech, and they don't want to talk about free speech. They want to talk about limiting speech. They want to talk about their partisan crap and how it pertains to how they could, censor speech and why they should do that. He goes on to ask about abhorrent things that people say and whether or not, the N-word should be banned. And, no. The N-word shouldn't be banned. Unfortunately, it's an awful thing to say to people, or for people to say. But then she gives the perfect example is that, a lot of music would be banned immediately if that were the case. Now, this is the reality of the situation. If you ban speech, who's the arbiter of all of this? The real idea here is that, yeah, even the most awful things should be said, or they should be allowed to be said, but we should be fighting bad ideas with better ideas, not with throwing people in prison, throwing people in jail. We've come a long way. One of my favorite writers from the 1700s, Thomas Paine, he spent time in an English prison because of the things that he said. He later helped out with the French Revolution, hoping that they would see freedom, only to find himself thrown in prison again for being against the idea of bringing the king to the guillotine. And then he moved to America and helped with the American Revolution. Things went a little bit better on that path. But anyway, I digress. We could talk more about this. I wanted to give my 2 cents in the beginning of this stream. And thanks for hearing me out on that one. And thanks for that. Now, I want to move on to the next part because I want to introduce my guests, because I've been looking forward to this all week. Because, well, my first guest, I've never spoken to before in my life. I've watched a bunch of his videos. I've seen a bunch of his content. I like what I see. And especially recently, talking about some of the things that are happening with our electoral processes and how suspect some of these things have been in recent times. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Frank Vaughan. Thanks for joining me, my man.
Hey, thanks for being here. Can you hear me, first off?
Absolutely. You sound great too, by the way. Great mic.
The second issue is pineapple doesn't belong anywhere near pizza.
Oh,
people are wrong.
You can have your free speech. You have your free speech.
Not my free speech.
I just, this is the thing. We should allow the worst speech. Bad ideas need to be combated with better ideas, and pineapple absolutely belongs on a pizza. And you know what? A friend of mine, incidentally an American, which the Americans like to blame us for the pineapple on pizza thing, introduced me to pineapple, pepperoni, and jalapenos. It's now my favorite pizza.
I don't know about any of you people.
It's a you people thing now. All right. I love it. But yeah, introductions. Frank, you're a YouTuber like me, commentary. You've been talking a lot about these elections. You guys just had an election, or are coming up on an election? What's the story there?
Yes. So, Saskatchewan just had an election. The Moe government squeaked out another majority. Looks like it's down to 3 seats now. And even though the popular vote was 53% for the Saskatchewan party and it went about 42% for the NDP, we came within about 1,500 votes of the Moe government losing and a leftist government coming in. And the NDP in Saskatchewan is definitely leftist. They have some pretty bizarre ideas. And to go back to the point that you opened with, if we don't have free speech, we're not going to be able to combat those bizarre ideas.
No,
it's been an adventure. But we used to do something called social enforcement when I was a kid. So say 10, 15 years old when I grew up. The generation that I grew up with, the men that were 10, 15 years my senior, there were certain things that weren't accepted. You could talk about them, but if you have brought up in fashionable conversation that you thought children should be transitioned, somebody probably would have sorted you out and you would have been ostracized for something like that, right? You could say it, but there was social enforcement back then. And now I think what's happening is we have governments that are interested in controlling the narrative to preserve their power. So it's not about what you say, it's about what you can say as it relates to what they are saying, and they can't afford to have articulate, informed opposition. So they just want to outlaw it.
What would you say to the idea that cancel culture is just a modern day version of that social enforcement?
I think it's an attempt at it, albeit it's a misguided one. Like the left likes to, I often say the left likes to cheat and they will fight dirty, whereas the right often will not cheat and likes to fight clean. And that's a shortcoming of the right because it's exposed us to danger. And that's how we got to all this DEI, diversity, inclusion, diversity, rainbow enforcement. So we've had to have our cultural icons like Tolkien, Star Wars. We've had to have them all completely ruined and destroyed forever. Probably maybe in 15 or 20 years, we'll have an attempt to actually reclaim the storyline and rewrite canon. I have no idea. But every single great piece of literature, even the Wheel of Time, Robert Jordan, this timeless piece, he had built this beautiful, diverse world that had all the races represented, every kind of idea that you could have. And they still had to cram it full of diversity and inclusion and kill the entire idea. So they've managed to hijack social enforcement for very nefarious ends. And it's very destructive to Western civilization. It's undermining us right to our roots. Like there isn't going to be anything left if we don't solve this problem.
Well, I'm glad you're also a fan of the same, I guess, Gen X, millennial generation sort of pop culture stuff, because I'm a huge fan of it. And it's all been a massive disappointment for me. I don't watch movies anymore.
I think culture peaked in the early aughties, and it's been on a downhill slide ever since. We don't produce great movies anymore. We don't produce great cinema. If you want truly good movies, you have to go to B movies. You have to go to the small independents that are never going to be played in a theater. They're never going to be on Netflix. They're never going to be anywhere in pop culture. Like you have to go seek it out. It's the same with music. If you want good music, you have to go find it now. It exists. There's bands out there and there's groups and there's productions that have hundreds of thousands and millions of followers, but you will never hear them on a radio. They will never be talked about in an awards ceremony. You have amazing hip hop and rap. Like there's some seriously good stuff out there, but if you ain't talking about hoes, you ain't getting radio play. Like it has to be absolutely degenerate to get radio play. So there's a lot of beauty still out there. We have to try and get it into the spotlight again. And we can't do that if we don't have speech.
No, absolutely. And that really is a problem. And I think a lot of this comes from being risk averse. And, because of cancel culture, because of all of these things that have been happening recently with governments cracking down as well, that's I guess that was the crescendo to cancel culture, when they just, okay, we're going to stop pretending that we're just grabbing the reins of power and just do it. And we're just going to do it. We're trying to do it like make it look like social ostracism. It really is just grabbing the reins of power and coming after people, which
Well,
has proven to be the case. I mean, we saw the Twitter files and all of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's been an attempt to almost rewrite anthropological nature. In nature, there's a certain way that men and women behave, and there's a certain way that we cohese as a culture and as a society. And this movement towards censorship and this movement towards the destruction of normal culture is driven by incredibly weak people with low self-esteem. You've got extremely bitter, hateful women, and you've got incredibly weak men. And the only way that they can prosper is if they get a hold of the reins of power to enforce through the barrel of a gun, because that's all government is. The government is a gun to your head at all times to pay taxes and to obey the law. And I'm not arguing whether it's necessary or not. I think that if society organically organizes, it's always going to end up with a hierarchical structure, whether you have tribal chieftains or you have democracies or you have authoritarian dictatorships, you're always going to evolve towards order of some kind. So we have to have order. The battle is over who controls the order. And right now we have some extremely mentally weak people who control the social media, cultural order, and have the power of the state behind them. And they want to take away completely normal people's abilities, who most don't want to stick their head above the firing line. Like you were saying, like it's dangerous. You have to put up with I often forget what I've gone through in terms of being called names and being booed at events and like all the different things I faced down in my time that have thickened my skin and made me stronger and more immune to it. A new person out the gate who's just tweeting for the first time and has to face the barrage of invective, and like you want to talk about protecting kids and you're called the P word. I don't know if we can say that on stream, but like you get called the most vile things.
Yes.
And I forget what that feels like the first time,
Well, I mean, you kind of just get used to, again, like you said, just you develop a thick skin and you move on. For me, the one that was weird for me that I had to get used to was the idea of a concern troll. Because I grew up, I'm a mechanic by trade. I pull wrenches every day between YouTube videos, and we shout at each other, we swear at each other, we say all the worst things, and that's just normal. But concern trolling has never been something in my realm. This whole idea of, oh, I used to like you until you said this thing. And wow, this concept of someone who was never, ever a fan or never did anything, coming along and pretending that they were just to get under your skin. That's a new one. That was a new one for me. And I had to get used to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's all kinds of ways that people just naturally manipulate each other, particularly weak people. It's funny how, I don't know if you've noticed a correlation, but people can have really low IQ, and I'm making an assumption here, but can have low intelligence quotient, but be very good with words and be very good with rhetoric and be very good with emotional manipulation. So somebody who isn't particularly smart can really screw you up if you take them too seriously. And I think concern trolling feeds into that a little bit. Like people trying to guilt or shame you. Like you have an audience member that tunes in, they watch your show and they're just like, man, I really like what you have to say, except for this one thing. Maybe you could just tweak that a little bit and I'll still like you. That is emotional manipulation.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's all that is. So you have to we talk about the insults and the names and the things that people will say about you. But then there's that layer of concern trolling. And you have to learn to deal with all of these things. And that's all just so you can speak your mind and oftentimes just say common sense. Like you have to really fight and you have to really be willing to take it just so that you can speak common sense. It's killer.
The best way, like as a creator to think about it now, I always, if I ever did respond to concern trolling, it's always, oh, okay, well, I hope the next creator you find fully fits the bill that you're looking for, because I mean, I'm not changing what I do. This is the way it's going, and this is really, at the end of the day, like it's making content and doing what you and I both do. It's a journey. It's a journey that takes you to all different places. And, you know, some people join you on that ride for a little bit of time and they'll jump off, and other people will jump on. I'm not concerned. I'm like, I'm more excited about the journey than I am about pandering to people to stick around, you know, that kind of thing. It helps when you're secure in your own situation. I mean, but yeah, concern trolling it's an interesting one. I've never dealt with it before until I started doing this stuff.
Yeah, you'll see all kinds of shade of human being in in the content creation world. It's incredible.
I like what you were saying though about the IQ thing, and I'll jump a step further. I think we just need to get more dads in households.
Oh, yeah.
we need more dads raising kids, and I'm not saying dads alone. Of course, I'm saying moms and dads. We need parents. We need parents that are doing their job, sticking around and raising kids, because that's where you don't get these crappy emotional manipulative people. I find that's a product of that.
Yeah, forgive me. I did a lot of reading about this when I started having kids, and one of the things that blew my mind was that a way to predict empathy in a child is whether there's a strong male presence in the household. If you remove the male presence from the household, whatever the scientific term escapes me, but the actual end product of empathy is diminished. There's less emotional stability there. And I found that incredibly interesting. We have denigrated masculinity in society, and it plays a very crucial role. It plays a crucial role in my household. It's my kids are very good. They don't often require a strong hand to keep them guided, but sometimes they'll get a little lippy with mommy, and there's a certain tone. There's a tone that dad hits. Like, I just use that tone, and boom, everybody's moving, and like, I don't have to hit them. I don't have to do anything. I just have to talk to them, and like, it's not like I'm forcing them. I'm reminding them of the road. They have to walk it themselves, and they figure out how to walk it. And like, one of the things that I've noticed of late, especially since I've gone back to content creation, is that my kids demonstrate more maturity and emotional intelligence than most of the human beings I'm dealing with online. It's the haters and the people who say, like, the back and forth on Twitter. First off, I can't imagine that people would behave that way if they were face to face with you. And second of all, what are you doing behaving in a way that I wouldn't tolerate from my 5-year-old? And like, what is this bringing out of people, and how is this possibly taking us to a good place? And I think there's a lot of a lack of respect, like just respect and male presence in people's lives. And you look at the country, all we have is effeminate men running this place, include right up to the prime minister.
Right up to the top.
We need daddy. We got to get daddy back, because everybody, the kids need to be put back in line. They've been running loose with the tax funds. They've been running loose with our tax dollars. They're taking away our speech. They're doing all this stuff. And you got to get a bit of authority back in there that's coming from the right place, that's coming from respect, that's coming from fairness, that's coming from actual moral virtue, not ethics. Ethics is what got us in this mess. We actually need morality too.
I think talking about behavior is a great way to introduce my second guest this evening. And behavior on Twitter is definitely his forte. He's been jumping on there and getting lots of attention recently with a lot of his videos that he puts out there. And you guys all know him. Welcome back to the show, Alex. Alex, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we're talking. Have you guys met before? Just introductions, really quick.
No, I don't think so. But I may have interacted with you on Twitter. I may have been one of the people you were just talking about.
So Frank Vaughan, amazing Zoltan Alex. He's got a pretty prolific Twitter account here in Canada. He's been doing a lot of good stuff as well. Investigative journalism. Broke the story about Jagmeet Singh's dying party financially, fiscally, putting themselves in the hole in the last election. Made national headlines. So congratulations on that, Alex, for sure. So we're talking. I mean, you've been listening to the whole conversation. Is there anything you want to add so far to what we've been saying?
No, I think I agree with everything on the whole for sure. People obviously don't act in real life the way that they do online, so I think that's an important thing to recognize, especially for people who don't touch grass very often. You know, it's kind of important for them to know that people aren't like that in IRL. You know?
So it's an interesting thing. Like, I've likened it to, you know, trying to have or attempting to have an intellectual conversation with an angry chihuahua behind a chain link fence. That's like talking on the internet to people on Twitter, right? But there's an actual phenomena that's going on that I can kind of pinpoint. And it's similar to that, but let's rehumanize people, put them back into their human skin suits, and put them behind a wheel of a car, and they're out on the road. Now you're separated from people physically. There's a barrier, and you're able to behave in ways that you wouldn't be able to behave if you were there face to face with each other. And we know this phenomenon. It's called road rage, and people lose their minds. They lose their minds in cars and behave really, really poorly. The internet is just road rage with an entirely new playing field of being able to express yourself.
Have you ever seen that video where it's a gate and there's dogs on either side of the gate and they're just barking at each other and they're all like ready to go and they're going to get scrapping, and then the gate opens and they kind of sniff each other and they go the other way? That's the internet.
It's absolutely that. It's crazy.
But you know, this election cycle, I feel like it's really different than the last election cycle, because my impression anyway, and maybe I'm wrong, you can confirm or deny, is that the discussions politically have become very siloed. So you have the left is on Reddit and the right is on Twitter, and it's like the chain link fence never opens. And I think that's one of the reasons that people just aren't even that invested. We're not even talking to each other anymore. We're in silent treatment zone.
They're so keyed up. They're so tense. They're so locked in to their ideology. And the cognitive dissonance of challenging that ideology is so uncomfortable. And it's so easy to mute and block. And I mean, I rarely go near Reddit because it's just a big pile of frustration for me, even just to find simple information. Sometimes it's good for solving problems, but other than that, but we don't.
Well, Reddit's got a huge problem for the new user. It's kind of like, you know, wanting a job and you need the experience, but you can't get the experience unless you have the job. They have the karma system. Where you can't get karma if you're a new user. I went and like years ago, I went and genuinely gave it an attempt to have discussions with people, and my comments just kept getting deleted. They're like, "Oh, you don't have enough karma to be in this." Oh, forget you. I'm out. See ya. It needs to be a level playing field, obviously, if you want to have conversation online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there has to be a desire to have a discussion, and that's missing. We don't want to talk anymore. We don't want to have uncomfortable conversations. We want to just get mad. We want to say F you, maybe call you a few choice words, and then block. Get that last word out and block, because that's your revenge, right? They can't get back at you, and you sit there and you're all self-satisfied. Like you can just picture this playing out a million times a day, everywhere, until, like Alex just said, we're all in our individual silos and nobody can move the needle anymore. You can't even have a conversation anymore. And it's interesting how I seen a chart. Well, it was a series of charts, and it looked at bipartisanship in the United States going back into the 1960s. And it was the members and all the different ways they voted together. And you could see that it was this interface and all these like vertices and a matrix. And then as we go online, it separates and separates and separates until now it is just blue and it is red and nobody's reaching across the aisle to each other anymore. And you look at the state of discourse. Pierre Poilievre is a fascist. We go to the other side and talk about Kamala Harris or Justin Trudeau being a communist. I think there's a better case there. I really do. If you want to go back, you read Solzhenitsyn and you read about revolutionary tribunals. We're in a modern form of that right now. So, like, yeah, I don't know if that's my bias showing, but we are definitely segregating as a society.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you there, except maybe the antics of it. I tend to lean towards what James Lindsay says, and he calls it neo-communism, and it's this like new branding of whether you want to call it fascistic tendencies or just straight up communism, but it's not the old communism of the 20th century. It's this brand new type of communism that incorporates free market some free market ideas and principles in order to prop up its failed ideology, if that's a good way of explaining it. James Lindsay obviously does a much better job, but I totally agree with that.
Another interesting theory that James Lindsay came up with recently is the theory of the woke right, if you're familiar with that one.
Are you talking about like the people who go so far and they become racists and all those other things?
Basically, yeah.
They become the SJWs they hate.
Exactly. So in the absence of leftists on platforms like X, formerly known as Twitter, what you have is people within the right-wing circle just adopting these leftist ideas, but inverting them, right? So they'll, and just like actual wokeism, there is some grain of truth to it, right? So they'll say, well, DEI policies are racist against white people. So they've just completely like internalized the SJW woke theories, but they've just inverted them. So now the social hierarchy or the victim hierarchy exists, but white people are at the top now and black people are at the bottom. It's pretty funny, but you do see it all the time.
I've always looked at, so like the political spectrum, everybody's got all these different graphs and these different things. I've always looked at it in a linear fashion. It's like you've got liberty that way, you've got authoritarianism that way, you've got the left and the right, right? So all the way on the left, you've got complete total authoritarianism. All the way on the right, you have anarchy. And then you step back a little bit away from anarchy, and then you have minimalist government. You have a slightly larger government until it gets, towards the center where you have like regulated markets and things that are leftist principles, but not authoritarian quite per se. And then it gets more and more authoritarian where your liberties are dwindling more and more and more until you have just full authoritarianism. So for me, it's hard to picture like those people being on the right at all. Like if you're looking at people who are arguing for limiting other people's rights because of their skin tone or whatever, that's not a libertarian principle. That's very much authoritarian. So I've always just looked at it that way and said, I think people just don't know where they are politically, if that's the case, if they're claiming that they're on one side.
The political spectrum has become very jumbled, hasn't it? Like if you look at the 2024 election, the US presidential election, you have two camps. So you have the Trump camp, which has a very large tent. And it includes people, for instance, frat boys who like wearing MAGA hats and they like that Trump is mean and a bully, and they love the fact that he dated a porn star. And then you've also got like these super religious right folks, like the most conservative religious people you could possibly think of, all within the same tent. That's not very like politically coherent as a tent when you really think about it. I mean, how do you square that circle? And then on the other side, on the Kamala Harris side, you have Queers for Palestine, which is even more ridiculous.
Yeah, it is very ridiculous.
So I feel like there's just a total political incoherence to this election. Yeah.
I think it's we're at a point where the dividing line is those who believe that their opinions are right and they need to be imposed, and those who have an opinion but feel it needs to be won in the public forum. And I think the unifying factor in the Trump big tent is just that we want to have a debate in society. Like the whole thing with Roe v. Wade being overturned and it going back to the states, that is so appropriate, because then you can have individual states with their individual citizens crafting laws that fit those people. And if you don't like them, you can move to another jurisdiction that you will like. It's like I say about Saskatchewan in the lead up to the election. I was like, can we have one place where families can just be normal and kids aren't coached into gender changes. And like, can we just do one place? There's lots of choice in this country. Go to Ontario, get a soji all day. They'll assign you caseworkers. You'll have all the government help you want. Or you can go to BC, no offense, but you can go to BC and you can get the same thing. Can you just leave us alone? Like, the provinces, the states are supposed to be individuated, and then we hand over a certain portion of the power to the federal government to look after things outside the country. So back to the point, I think the Trump camp is united around the idea that people can decide, whereas the other camp feels like they know what's good for everybody and it must be imposed.
Isn't that weird that like it's flipped so radically on our lifetimes? I'm assuming we're all kind of similar in age. I grew up in the 80s and like mostly in the 90s. I grew up in the 80s. I say that, but I don't remember much of it. I grew up in the 90s, but back in those days, it was always the left being the champions of free speech. It was always the right were the ones that were trying to censor your video games and trying to censor all these things. Do think about the children clutching their pearls and doing all that. And it's flipped entirely in our lifetime. It's flipped so crazy that the Trump, Trump and the right, the same guys, the guy who they call him Milhouse, he's supposed to be like, Pierre Poilievre, and he's supposed to be this like oil loving, whatever, Bible thumping, but he's the champion of free speech. He's the guy who's going to bring us back to normalcy. Instead, it's mind boggling how it's flipped entirely since, and it hasn't taken that long.
The kids these days, and I'll say it that way, I came of age in the 1990s. It was one of the best times to be a teenager and to turn 20 in the year 2000. But I can remember going to Toronto, and it was the left that went there to protest the Iraq war and to demand that Canada stay out of it because it was all based on BS pretext. And I remember going on the buses. I did all that stuff. That stuff. And it is so bizarre to me now to see the Cheneys campaigning with Kamala Harris in the Democrat Party. Like, it's so bizarre to me because in 20 years, it has completely inverted. So now the Republicans are actually more liberal than the Democrats on a lot of these issues. And maybe, I don't know what the proper terminology of it, they're more liberal when it comes to, again, gender changing your kids. They might be more liberal to that. And they might be more liberal when it comes to late term abortion and all this other stuff. But the Republican Party is the party of freedom and small government. That wasn't the way it was 20 years ago. They were the war machine. They were Raytheon. They were that was Boeing. That was all of them. And it's completely inverted in a very short amount of time. Like we used to have, I'll finish on this point. The 40, 50, 60 years ago, before my time, thank God, there were classical liberals and there were classical conservatives, and they all agreed on one thing, and that was government was evil, but it was a necessity. So it was about how limited it was versus how many domains it got into. And we've gone to the point now where government is a replacement for mom. It's a replacement for dad. It's a replacement for hard work. It's a replacement for independence. Who needs independence when the state is God? It's a replacement for God. I was listening to Tucker Carlson. He gave a speech before he did that town hall with Trump last night. And in that speech, he was talking about how their mantras and their slogans are very much dogmatic. They're like religious ceremony, but there's no God involved. It's just the state. And that's, we've just drifted so far from the roots. Society used to understand that government was a necessary evil, and now government's being embraced as the ultimate good. And that's problematic, to say the least.
Yeah, the religion of the state. It's funny, South Park predicted this ages ago with one of their episodes where they had a godless society, and then it became tribalistic for other reasons, regardless. And people that behave just like they would in religious, fervent ways. No, you're absolutely right on that. It's it's insane the way people are behaving, and the way this this election cycle has gone entirely.
Well, and we're encouraging people to, like, instead of sticks and stones may break my bones and words will never hurt me, we talk about words as violence now. You have any idea how toxic a society has gone when that is a mantra that people will chant by the thousands? They'll go to the street and they'll talk about words as violence. Weak people. They have no self-respect. They have little self-esteem. And that's the core of the problem. And they think that somebody out there can give it to them when they got to find it in here. But to get it in here, you have to do the work. Like, you have to go through the valley of the shadow of death and come out the other side. You have to go through the trial. Like, all of our myths, religious myths, Greek myths, talk about this trial by fire, talk about going through challenges and overcoming adversity. Our society is built around removal of adversity, to the point where you can't even encounter dangerous words anymore. So what future do we have in a world where, by the way, the other cultures, the Chinese culture, the Russian culture, the Indian subcontinent, the Arab cultures, none of them are doing this crazy stuff. They're just not doing it because they get it. They understand it. They just got to wait us out. We'll kill ourselves off with this mental rot.
We will, and I think those people are a minority in our society. They're just very vocal, and they're yeah, the cry bullies, right? The cry bullies, the ones that I'm a victim, you know, perpetually pander to me. I want that, you know. That's the way things work. But I think it's a product of the largesse of government, in a sense. And I've said this before, and forgive me if you've heard this before, but it's this concept that as the larger the government gets and the more intrusive it gets, the more involved in your life it gets, the more you then need, as a necessity for survival, need to get involved in the political process if you're on one side or the other. And because it gets bigger, you have to fall into one camp or the other, because, you know, you either fit with that team or you fit with that team. You won't fit perfectly with either team, but you're going to have to get into one of the teams, and it's going to be headed by retards, for lack of a better word. And the government will be so intrusive that you're like, I need to vote for these guys, because if the other guys get in, they'll take away all my rights. And the other side's thinking the same thing. So everybody's clamoring for power harder and harder, and trying to circumvent more, and the leaders are trying to circumvent more power as they get. It's this like self-perpetuating process, and the only cure is to make government smaller, in my humble opinion. I think the smaller government gets, the less intrusive it is in people's lives, the less it even is relevant for the average person that's just trying to go about their daily business and just live their lives. I mean, who cares what's happening with the government if it largely doesn't affect you?
Yeah, and I mean, it's so interesting to me how we talk about progress, we talk about being progressive, we talk about all these high-minded ideas and shoving these ideals down people's throats. We got to start teaching your kids in preschool to adopt these ideologies so that they never even have a chance of resistance. And thank God, kids are programmed to rebel. So there's a generation coming up now that's going to really push back on this. At least that's what I think. Maybe I'm just a hopeless optimist, but I see seeds of it out there. But
I want to see the what was it, Dirty Dancing, the reboot? Or is it Footloose? Footloose with instead of the preacher, it's going to be like the woke person telling everybody they're not allowed to dance.
Yeah, like I can't even bring myself to watch anything anymore. Like, my wife's always like, "Can we just watch a movie?" I'm like, "No, I can't. My blood pressure is going to go through the roof. I know right away it's going to suck. If it's not a B movie that one of the actors in my life has sent me, I'm not watching it anymore. Like, I can't even do it." But anyway, the point I was trying to make was we live in a time of all this advancement. We got the internet, we got Twitter, we got virtual reality, we got all this cool stuff. We got blockchains, we can do smart contract voting, we can't even get an elected Senate in this country, and we have no right of recall. So when we got a guy in power being enabled by another couple guys who are just trying to get their pension, they can hold the whole damn country hostage, and we have no ability whatsoever. And the one time they held the entire country hostage, they banned dancing in public spaces, and they took away your freedom of movement over a fairly what proved to be a fairly mild respiratory infection overall. I mean, if it was the Black Death and bubonic plague, you wouldn't have to tell anybody it was a problem. They'd be able to see it, and they would respond accordingly. They took all that away. And so there was one movement of all the protests, whether it's Palestinians, whatever cause du jour, we had one movement that was full of Canadian flags and full of Canadian pride, and all they wanted to do was restore your freedom. And they've been prosecuted. They've been run through the ringer. People lost their right to transact and buy food as a result of that. Like the idea of upgrading the system and getting accountability is it seems so far away, but I have to believe at the same time that we're on the cusp of great change, because this process that we're under right now cannot go on forever.
Well, we can only go up from here.
I would think so.
I mean, with this government, we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. It's hard not to be optimistic.
No, but it can get much worse. Holy cow. What can happen is someone who's, a little bit more able to do the job than Justin Trudeau with even worse intentions could come in and jump at the opportunities that he's paved the way for, with all of the bills. The bills, how else can you call them? Anti-free speech, anti-democratic.
Like it could always be worse.
Yeah.
It could always be. I mean, Jagmeet Singh could be prime minister. Like
that's true. That's
as much as Trudeau is terrible, that guy's worse. He's like the most psychopathic guy in the entire house. He did show some courage when he confronted that protester, if that wasn't contrived in some way. But like this guy, I can't believe it. It's not just that he gets ratioed every single day. I've never seen somebody able to encompass such hypocrisy in one personality, where he can moan and cry every single day about the prime minister. Every opportunity he has to do something, he's like, no, keep going, man. It's good to go. Good to go. My date.
I can't believe I would ever give credit to Jagmeet Singh, but he does show great restraint with the block button. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons he's getting ratioed all the time. He very rarely blocks anyone. Yeah. So gotta give
he probably doesn't want to get sued. He would get sued right away. You can't block people as a government.
But he could turn off the replies, and he doesn't. He keeps them on. He's not a Mark Garrettson or anything. So
it's a good point. That is a good point.
I can't believe I just threw a dog a bone to Jagmeet Singh of all people, but
you are good at the devil's advocate. I gotta hand it to you. You definitely get in there and throw it out.
there's a silver lining.
It's good to be able to say something nice about everybody that you know.
Absolutely, and that's a talent that you have, Alex. I'm not joking. I'm laughing, but I'm not joking. It's something I find that every time I get into a conversation with you, you do have like an empathy for the other side, and you look at all angles, and that's definitely it's commendable.
Thanks. Yeah, I've been getting embroiled in a lot of very angry spaces lately about the Khalistan issue. You just mentioned Khalistan, so I thought I'd bring that up.
Well, that's a whole protest. That's a whole stream all on its own. Oh, is there?
Yeah, in Vancouver. So Bratney, of all people, just messaged it to me. And
is that for or against, or what's the occasion?
It is. So there's a consulate, or there's people from the consulate, I believe, doing some kind of stuff at a Gurdwara, and the police have to set up a system to block the two of them, because it's going to be two competing groups of Indians or people of the Indian diaspora, however you want to describe them. Some of them aren't Indians, but whatever, they're going to be fighting. So I'm going to go check that out. That sounds interesting.
When are we going to add a third official language? What year do you think we're going to do that in this country?
Well, I think we should get rid of French altogether. I mean, they should just make the official language. Well, I mean, Quebec can keep being bilingual because there's just too many people who speak English there, too many Anglophones. But the rest of the country could do without French altogether, no problem. Especially with modern technology, you can translate anything on a beer bottle in 2 seconds.
But
Yeah,
what happens?
totally no reason for it.
A big enough diaspora, Indian diaspora, that Punjabi becomes just as spoken in the country as French. What happens
Well,
then?
wouldn't the like Chinese, isn't it spoken? I pontificated this once, and we don't have the numbers. I actually looked into it, had other people look into it, couldn't find the numbers, but I believed, I still believe this, that more people speak Chinese as a first language than French as a first language in Canada.
So we might already be there.
I think we're already there, but like obviously it's not an official language. But here's the thing: we, as Alex was just pointing out, we can just translate it. Those services are available to anyone in Canada, no matter what your native language is. If you have a hard time understanding one of the two official languages, you can have it translated to your native language, and they'll get you an interpreter if need be. They'll do whatever they can to make sure that you understand in your native language official documentation and things like that. So why is there even a need for French as an official language? It doesn't make sense.
I think some of the precedents that we've set in this country, and I think I was trying to make I was trying to make a point. I made it in a bad way. We have set precedents legally for Quebec. It's as a distinct society, its language laws that can and will be exploited as Canada's population increases past 40 million, 50 million, 60 million. There will be other ethnic groups in this country that demand similar rights, and they will have a legal basis to do so. And they will eventually, if we keep going on the track we're on, they'll outnumber the French. They will outnumber the Native American population. But the rules that are set up to help and encourage those cultures to survive will be exploited by diversity to further cement it. So I think we are set up to preserve what was here 80 to 100 years ago. But what's going to end up happening is the very things that we set up to preserve those cultures are going to be exploited to deconstruct them.
Well, here's the thing: like Canadian laws. I really disagree with this. But this has been our practice in my observation through the course of my lifetime, is that there's no equality in law for everybody. Particular cultural or ethnic or religious practices will be allowed for certain people and not for other people. I think that we should just have a single set of rules across the board, and if you know certain things you're not allowed to do, or you can't indulge in certain things because your whatever practices or cultural or whatever it happens to be won't allow for the rules that exist, then we should never make exceptions. We should only decide that the rules are not good rules because they don't apply or they don't work, or that's just the thing you have to give up for your religion. So for example, not the hijab, but the full facial coverings for certain
niqab,
yeah, the niqab. So if that's a thing, you're giving up showing your face for your religion. Well, you should also give up your driver's license, because that's a requirement for a driver's license to have your face on a picture. If you can't do that, well, then you can't comply with the regulations around getting a driver's license. Sorry, those are the rules. And if you can't, you're giving up a lot of stuff already for your religion. Driver's license could be one of them. There's, certain rules around being able to carry particular sharp objects. Exceptions are made. I don't think exceptions should be made. If the rule is the rule, you either fight to have the rule changed so that there's no exception, but you fall under the category of what is now legal, and everybody else does too, or you have to make concessions. I think everybody should follow the same rules, and there shouldn't be exceptions for anybody. for any reason?
So I generally find demographics just to be kind of an interesting topic and subject. I find them interesting, and I've been doing a lot of research on the Sikh diaspora for some projects I'm working on, and I've uncovered some interesting observations. One of them being that it is one of the largest transnational migrations in human history, especially in terms of the amount of people a country is absorbing. So the estimates are anywhere between 500,000 and 2 million people came from Punjab to Canada. So that's, about 5% of our population. The only thing that would be equivalent to that would be Italian Americans at the turn of the 19th century. There's about 15 million people. About 12 of them went to the United States. So relatively in context, it's about the same, which is kind of interesting. But what I found particularly interesting about that is that the first wave, which was probably, I think, somewhere around 500,000, came in 1984. And those people were child rearing age and they had kids in Canada. So there's this observation of, why do I see so many Indians everywhere? Well, it's a combination of two things. One is we brought in 2 million, just over the last few years. But you also have millions of Indians being born in Canada. They're hardly Indian at all. They just look Indian, right? So
Yeah.
you see these people on the train, you go, it's full of Indians, right? But very few of them probably on any given train were even born in India. It's just an interesting observation that you only really realize when you look into the numbers and you start thinking about it more critically.
There's a buddy of mine back in Ontario. He's a police officer, and he's, I believe, second generation Punjabi. And when he shows up at a party, he's wearing blue jeans, he's wearing a plaid shirt, and he is speaking impeccable English. There isn't a hint of an accent there. But if you looked at him, you would think new Canadian, but he's not a new Canadian. He's actually rapidly moving into old stock territory. So
They say your culture disappears when you change countries. It's like only 2 generations, and you lose the language, you lose the accent, and that's fairly universal across the board. It's quite interesting.
Well, and this is where I get into trouble with guys that are on the actual far right. I don't like that term at all, but the guys that are actually over there, the ethnic nationalists who never seem to have children, they're all about the white people, but they don't have any kids. That's a problem for me. But anyway, where I get into trouble with them is they say that it's culture and ethnicity cannot be separated, and I disagree, because I know many people who belong to different ethnicities that are culturally Canadian in every single way. They obey the laws, they know what Halloween is, they understand Christmas. There's all these things that are shared, and if you give immigration enough time for the culture to permeate into that new population, you achieve a nice equilibrium, and but we're not doing immigration that way. We're trying to shove people in to the course of 500,000 to 1 million a year. It depends on how you want to score what we're doing. There isn't enough time for absorption. There isn't enough time for the economy to catch up, and there isn't enough time for the culture to imprint itself. So we're starting to fragment. We're starting to fray. You could say that we've been actually on the fraying side and the fragmentation side for 4 or 5 years now. And even the Liberals are starting to catch up with this party. You see what they're doing with international students, with temporary foreign workers, lowering their immigration targets. I've been saying for the last year and a half that this pivot's coming no matter who's in office, because if they keep going the way they are, the whole country will just fragment. So they have to hit the brakes on it. But
the Century Initiative, they were talking about making the population of Canada 100 million by 2050.
Who wants that? Who wants that? Like,
nobody.
In an era where carbon is everything to these people, and they talk about carbon footprints and everything else, why are we paving over more of the best farmland? Because that's where all the cities are. Like, let's double the size of Vancouver so it goes all the way up the Fraser Valley and you lose that farmland forever. Let's pave like everything underneath the mega city of Toronto. That's the best farmland in Canada. It's gone forever. And like, where are you going to put them? You're going to put them up in high rises? Like,
but I get a little frustrated in the right-wing circles, though, because I feel like people treat immigration as if it's this catch-all problem. Like, if we just turn off the immigration valve, all of a sudden, all of our other problems will just magically fix themselves.
That's
right.
Fair.
It's kind of just this constant thing that people talk about, but they don't really think about it. right? So I mean, for instance, somebody said, "Oh, you're pro-immigration. Have you been to a hospital recently?" Well, actually, yes, I have. I was in a hospital, and 90% of the patients in Canada are probably, well, in this hospital at least, 90% of the patients were nativist Canadians. They were white people, and 90% of the people working there were foreign born. And so I think for a lot of people, they don't realize that immigration is a solution to more of their problems than they think, and the cause of less of the problems than they think.
Yeah, I think what people are getting at though is not that immigration, because that's the immigration that we've always had in Canada.
Sure,
The
immigration could be
merit
better,
system, people coming over, filling jobs that are required in Canada that we
of
haven't been
course.
filling organically on our own. The
The
recent
system could always be better, but it
oh,
doesn't mean that immigration in and of itself is a bad thing.
no, absolutely. No, no, no. I think immigration's a good thing and we should always have immigration. But what they've been doing recently with all these backdoor schemes to get people to come in that are, you know, entry level type people, like not professionals in any sort of sense of the you know, nobody's coming over here to quitting their job as a doctor somewhere in the world to drive Uber, you know, or work at a corner store at a Tim Hortons, something like that. It's these are people that are coming over with this whole dream. They're being sold this dream in Punjab by scammers to come over to Canada. They're spending their life savings, or maybe even their family's life savings, to this company to send them to a fly by night college above a rub and a tug in a strip mall. You know what I mean? And then they're getting churned out business degrees. And what good's a business degree? What good is it? It does nobody any good, and it's not doing Canada any good. That's for sure.
It did the people who sold the courses good.
Oh, that's it. That's it. And that's where that whole what was it? Mark Miller, who said they're a lucrative asset to our economy. And that's what it was. It's $1 billion, you know, scheme to pump these people through these academic sham places. They're not even good academia. And what's the result? Well, you're just, now Canada's left with a bunch of people. So the other side of the coin is we have this economic problem that's looming that nobody really wants to talk about, nobody wants to address formally, and that's social security, social insurance. We've promised pensions to people based on this Ponzi scheme of, you know, we're gonna pay you off with the new people that are paying the you know, the taxes for it. And oh, and by the way, you're living a lot longer, and we're not increasing the age of when you get to retire. And anytime we try to do that, you can look forward to 10 years of a liberal government. Like, that's really where we're at. And nobody wants to address the fact that we have this massive unfunded liability. So that everyone in government's like, oh, well, I guess we'll just turn on the immigration button, because then we'll have more new
people aren't
taxpayers.
having kids either, right? So
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
where else
need
are you
more,
gonna? You're right.
need
It
more
is built like a
taxpayers.
Ponzi scheme. The whole economy, right? It's new depositors pay the old depositors out.
That's it. And if we can't address that, then they're just going to do what anybody will do to kick the can down the road, so they could pass it on to the next schmuck who ends up running the government, and just add more IOUs to that fund of pensioners that eventually won't be getting paid. And that's really at the end of the day where it's going to go.
People make arguments all the time, and I think they're good arguments. Like, maybe we should create incentives for people to have, or more incentives for people to have children in Canada. And then that way we have to rely less on immigration. Well, that's totally fine. You're free to try that, but I just don't think it's going to solve many of your other problems, you know, other than having more Canadian-born babies.
I honestly think just we have a flawed economic outlook on the world. So I think, and this is my pontification, you guys can add to this or tell me I'm wrong, but I believe that human beings have two types of reproductive strategies. Typically in nature, you have the R and the Y type, I believe they're called. There's the, you know, like the sea turtles that lay a bunch of eggs, take off, and just I hope they make it. You know, that kind of reproductive strategy. Rabbits do the same, have lots of offspring and just hope for the best. Or like wolves or elephants or pandas, things like that, where they have very few young and they rear them. I think that the factor that differentiates the two different strategies is economic stability. So if you have bad economic stability, people tend to have lots and lots of babies and hope that, you know, the young will survive, and then once they survive, they'll take care of you in your elder years. And the other strategy is when you're doing really well, you have less children. You have less children, and you focus on just having a few and rearing them up. And this is the natural cycle of having a large population and then the population coming down. And we should get used to a shrinking population and plan for that. Maybe that's a strategy. Even India is looking at this, going out to about 2050. They're concerned about people leaving their country because they might be going into population decline in several decades, and they don't want to have these issues based on their
China
current
already is
models.
I mean, China is
massive,
well on its way,
massive. Yeah. So, and Japan's under the same boat. I mean, all of the Western world is in the same boat. Maybe the solution is not to just import an entirely new tax base for the next generation. Maybe we could do a bit of that. You know, we can have immigration.
It's
I'm not
certainly
against
over
it,
the
but
speed limit immigration right now.
Yeah.
I'll agree with that. There's no question about that.
Absolutely.
Well,
But we need to address those situations. We have a declining population.
I think that if you get it within the speed limit, it's not going to fix that many other problems. I think people are overstating the importance of immigration on the whole, but it is over the speed limit.
Well, and nobody wants to. The problem with politics is that no politician wants to deliver the bad news, and the reality is that the next 10 to 20 years is going to be a rocky period of time, regardless of who is steering the ship and guiding us through. We have a population problem. We have an overabundance of wrong immigration, a mismanagement of the immigration system. And it's interesting too, because these people, a lot of the proponents of mass immigration would bill themselves to be against the exploitation of various ethnic groups. They want to talk about DEI, they want to talk about equality, but the entire immigration system is built on exploitation. Now, I would say, like, what is temporary foreign work? What is international students, but padding out the financial numbers of our universities and institutions? Like, it's big business. It's okay for an immigration system to be exploitative if it yields to the overall health and benefit of the nation that's doing it. So it's okay to have a one-sided immigration policy where it's like, hey, you come in here, you come in for money, you fill this hole in the labor market, but know that you're not here permanently, and you can send money back, you can do all these different things, and it's advantageous to you, but you're not a permanent resident, and we're not going to give you a pathway. Would you like the money? Do you want to improve your life? And there's going to be people who take that offer up. And at the same time, we have, even back when I was in school, the idea of having families was that it was this great burden and it was going to present the end of your life. If you had children, it was game over for you. It was the worst thing that you would ever do. And I got to say, I bought into that until I started having kids. And then I'm like, hey, this ain't so bad. This is one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. I get to give a good life. And they give me just as much as I give them. And it's actually the idea that it's expensive. It's not that expensive. It's already subsidized. So if you're working low income, the state is already subsidizing you to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars a year. If you have a couple kids, which would be replacement. I mean, we have to have 2.1 kids. You have to get the birth rate up. You have to create incentives for people to have kids, but you also have to be mindful of the fact that there's this great big lag because it takes a long time to get a human going. And we have these things called child labor laws, and we believe in the sanctity of childhood, or at least we used to. We're starting to play with that again. But it's going to take time, and that time is going to be painful. What politician wants to deliver that message?
Oh, no, none of them. Yeah, it's a death sentence for a politician. And this is why they're avoiding a lot of these issues.
I think you can deliver it. I think you can get the public on board, but you have to have strong leadership that conveys that message and actually explains it tirelessly. And we don't have that right now. And there's probably good, valid reasons for that. You have to convince a big chunk of the electorate to put an X beside your name. Like, politicians aren't an enviable spot either. They can only say so much. Even if they have big plans, it's a step. Like, people don't like Machiavellians, but Machiavellians are the only people who get anything done, especially in a democracy.
So
in Hungary,
go ahead, Alex.
They have a really interesting policy in Hungary. So you get a percentage off of your income taxes for every child you have. So if you have one child, you get 20% off. If you have two, 40, 60, 80, 100, so on and so forth.
That's a better system.
It's a way better system, because
way better than subsidizing, because then you could make more if you just make more money.
Exactly. And it also encourages the highest functioning people, because generally the highest income earners are the highest functioning people, to have the most kids, right? So you have doctors and engineers having kids rather than people, poor people, right? Like, well, I mean, like, I grew up poor, whatever. It's a term of endearment.
The culture and the economic magnet that is Western civilization, that makes all these people want to come to our countries, will not sustain itself by replacement. We have to have people raised in the culture. We have to have people raised with the ethic and the ethos. And if we don't do that,
and I'm not trying to be obtuse here, but part of that culture is selfishness. And so I'm not so sure, even if you do introduce these types of financial incentives, if Canadian culture if people are going to have kids anyway. And you also have the introduction of the internet, right? So people are very capable of entertaining themselves, right? People aren't going outside. People aren't going to bars. People aren't even going, most people actually meet at work is how they get married. Now you have remote work. So I think that you're going to run into this population crisis pretty much no matter what. I don't want to be nihilistic about it, but
we're already in it, man. Like, I don't think
we're in it. Yeah,
crisis. We're a third of the way into it. Like, we haven't. We're not right over the bump yet. Like, we still got that workforce outflow of I don't even think they're baby boomers anymore. Like, we're into the next generation, but as that population moves out of the workforce, you're seeing more and more of the shortages. So I think we're already in it, and I think that's why everything's so chaotic. I think that's why the immigration system is so chaotic. These guys, they're just flood the country, keep it going. Like, we don't want to.
I think they just lost track of it. I don't think that they intended for it to go this far over the speed limit. Just the guy with the radar gun slept in. He wasn't there. So it was a free for all.
Well, yeah, and now traffic's backing up, and this is
trying to run an airport. Can you just picture that?
Yeah, and the tow truck drivers didn't show up either, and like, I really do think it's because everybody says it became so much worse after the pandemic. Well, I don't think that's a coincidence. A lot of public servants and civil servants just stopped working. I mean, they're still fighting to not go back to work more than 3 days a week. So I think a lot of papers just came across people's desks who weren't there, and the cleaning staff threw them away. Like, I always say, like, don't attribute malice where incompetence will suffice. I think that this Trudeau government is just profoundly incompetent. I don't think they could get anything malicious done if they tried, because they've never been able to get anything done. Why would they be able to get malicious things done?
I love your optimism. But okay, so I want to get into this other topic, and this is I guess the segue here would be, so the people figure out that they want something different, they want change, but the apparatus that's there doesn't want change, and they're in charge of counting the votes. They're in charge of setting the agenda for the elections, and they're in charge of doing all of that. And it looks like it's going to go towards the other stuff, and then all the new rules take place, and on the 23rd hour, we end up with a majority of the same guys again. Now, this is the story that's been happening, and a lot of people have been taking notice of rules that have changed in British Columbia. They've changed in other provinces. They've changed federally. They've changed in the United States. They've changed in all kinds of jurisdictions where people are thinking, hey, we see the writing on the wall, and we see the politics wanting, and people politically wanting this other thing, but then the votes get really weird, and we can't have our votes on voting day. We're having voting week, and we're having voting. It's going to be voting month pretty soon. It's going to be, and then of course, your absentee votes, which are completely voluntary. Instead of you need an excuse, a good one at that, to be absent on voting day. We're even talking about not even needing ID in the United States to vote in a bunch of states. And people are becoming suspect of the results of these elections. And now it's this big thing, of course, because it's the flavor of the week, and people are in tune to this. We have media coming out and saying anybody who questions it is a conspiracy theorist and a wacko and a whatever. You might as well be denying Sandy Hook, if you're saying these things. But there is genuine reason to be alarmed about all these rule changes. Frank, what do you think?
Well, where do you even begin with that? The U.S. election is a gong show. Now, those people get way more choice than we do, but unfortunately, they're voting on computer screens, and they're dropping their ballots in these boxes in the middle of the street, which are then set on fire. But it's even just the idea of dropping your ballot in a box, or something that's foreign in Canada. Voting without ID in Canada, as far as I know, doesn't happen anywhere. Like, you have to show ID to vote in this country. Every provincial election I've ever participated in.
Unless they call you because it's raining, apparently, in British Columbia. That's a new thing.
There's something weird going on in BC, man. Like, there's whether it's crooked or not. So I observed this very directly. It's very recent in my mind. Saskatchewan does not have tabulators, no digital tabulators. We do have some mail-in voting, and it's run better than some places. But what happens when you have this election week? There's a week of early voting, and the ballots are coming in. They're already being cast. And during that week, leading up to Election Day, you've got all of these woke polling companies releasing polls showing the NDP ahead by 3, 4, and 5 points. 5 polls in a row, one with a sample size. Because there was this guy, Mr. Boots, who talked about how there's not enough money in polling in Saskatchewan, and there's not enough interest in it, even though there's this well-established history going back through all these different elections. Forum Research had a sample size of 2,700, and they said the NDP was ahead by 3 or 4 points, and they lost by whatever they finished on, because we had to do the voting counting thing is still ongoing. We won't have a final count until November 9th, I think it is. It was like a 10-point polling miss. Those are suppression polls when they come out after voting started. So if you want to have your voting week, go ahead. But your mail-in ballots have got to be in by Election Day, and there should be no polls released during voting week to skew the results, because it's just when we stretch voting day out, it creates opportunities for manipulation, whether it's suppression polling, whether it's suppressive articles, whether it's mail-in voting that's loosely regulated and open to everybody, advantaging certain parties over other parties. I think you got to be super careful when you start playing this game. Now, in the United States, those poor people, they're voting on computer screens, like digital voting. There's no piece of paper. It should never happen. I don't think machines should be anywhere near an election. Paper balloting works. Hand counting works. Just leave it at that. But in BC, for instance, if you've got to have tabulators deployed in BC, there should be randomly selected recounts, not by margin of victory, but manual recounts, because this has been studied. It was studied in Alberta. I've got a great document sitting in my inbox where the tabulators, when honestly programmed, because they can be reprogrammed, but when they're actually programmed just to count, they introduce up to 10 times the error that humans introduce in counting. So they're not efficient. They create problems. They malfunction. And I do not see the need for them unless there's, the Occam's razor in me just cuts to nefarious intent. It's an opportunity. It's a window to shape outcomes. When they're trying to come after your speech, They're trying to regulate what you can say. They're trying to regulate what you think. They're trying to regulate what you can put online. They're telling you what you have to believe. They got hate speech laws so that you can't engage with protesting certain ideals. Why wouldn't they try to manipulate elections? It's old as history. When there's an election, somebody's going to try and play with it. So anyway, there's a lot there. Please respond, or I'll just keep talking.
Yeah, Alex, what are your thoughts?
When we were doing the BC election coverage, somebody who was on the Sean Newman podcast, somebody who was on that podcast made a great point. They said politics is, I think they said, a contact sport. So here's my thoughts on election fraud or potential election fraud. It might be happening, sure, but we have to pick ourselves up when we get knocked down and figure out why we didn't win, and just basically operate under the assumption that the election was fair. Right? It really doesn't matter if it was rigged or not, because if it was rigged and we had won in the marketplace of ideas so significantly, then nobody would believe it. Right? Ultimately, we have to look at why they lost the election as if the election was won fair and square. Otherwise, politics just becomes a game of tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. And, if somebody wants to prove that the election was fraudulent, they would have to do so, and that would make great work for some other journalists, but it's just not something that matters to me. And so if you're looking at why the Conservatives lost in BC, I think the first thing that we have to address, and I didn't want to say it because I was supporting the Conservatives. I didn't want to be critical prior to the election, but the vast majority of BC's population lives in Vancouver and Victoria. Those are the most liberal places on earth. It is basically the San Francisco of our universe. I don't know, who thought it was in good judgment to run a party called the Conservative Party, where the vast majority of the population of the province does not even identify as conservative. And people will say, well, it was a holdover from when they were in the legislature. But if you recall, the NDP wanted them to run under a different name at the last minute because they said they were piggybacking off of the federal Conservatives. So in my opinion, that was a gift and they should have taken it, because you win elections, in my opinion, through the low information voter. That, especially in an election this tight. So it's that lady who gets convinced to go vote by her coworker randomly because she gets a few hours off of work. And there are so many people that are just so liberal in their thinking in Vancouver that they'll never vote Conservative. They associate, just because of the connotations of the word, right? They'll associate that with anti-abortion rights. They'll associate it with, right-wing stuff that they don't like. And so I just think it was in really poor judgment to run as the Conservative Party. And I think that if they had run as anything else, they could have been the Blue Rose Party, or the Alternative Party. I think that they would have won the election.
That's some fair points there. I want to bring up the idea, though, that if there's opportunity to cheat, then people will make assumptions that cheating had occurred. The whole idea
there will always be opportunities.
Well, yeah, and this is why I'm saying the more they introduce new ways and new opportunities, the more people will think that voter fraud is occurring, or that those are the reasons. And if they're not the reasons, well, they're definitely opening up the door for people to say that it's suspect and they don't trust the system, right? If you, all of the different ways, and it's pretty ridiculous, the different ways. And we can list them off. There who did a great it was Yak Stack who listed them all off, and it was I had it queued up. I don't anymore. Anyway, I'll just, all the things, vote calling in, voting a week in advance, opening up absentee voting to pretty much anybody instead of excuses, counting votes well after the date that come in, tons of votes showing up, allowing the staff during the week to take ballot boxes home with them and handle them at home and then bring them back as if that's not an unusual thing. All of these things happen. So take, for example, Mike Pence. He got a lot of crap during his vice presidency because he made a statement saying he doesn't he doesn't spend time with other women alone other than his wife because he just doesn't want the appearance of any improprieties. And he got a lot of flack for that. Like, oh, well, people should just be able to trust you. And he's raising the point that, well, there's no reason I should be in that position. And the only reason other people might assume is for nefarious purposes. So I'll just avoid giving the impression that bad stuff could be happening by just doing things on the books. You know what I mean? So we always have done elections with proper ballots on one day. It did rain. It did rain in the province that always rains.
Yeah, in October, which is shocking.
Shocking.
Nobody could have ever expected that. But
but here's my argument that if there's opportunity for it to look suspect, people are going to assume.
That's the thing, though, is that at the end of the day, if you haven't won enough of the public opinion for it not to ever look suspect, then that's where you've created the opportunity. You've kind of lost the game. There will always be some level of cheating in politics and sports and business. You know, they're all, not me, of course, but other people. For sure.
I like the way you frame that. So here's
an
interesting
old saying, like, if you're not cheating, you're not trying, right? So, like, you know, people will find shortcuts all the time. So maybe some cheating does occur. I don't know. I think it would be really hard to pull off on a massive scale. And I think that it would require a lot. The problem is it's so hard for more than two people to keep a secret. Right. So you'd almost have to do it on that large of a scale, have at least 2 or 3 people. And, you know, the conspiracies, the bigger they get, the less likely they are. And so you just, again, and I have to beat this dead horse more with the conservative thing. So I just have to, because something else, we were talking before about like the political spectrum. What does it mean to be a conservative? Mm-hmm. So I started looking at the conservative platform and I was like, well, they're not even technically conservatives. So they want to change the status quo with regards to collusion between big pharma and government. They want to change the status quo when it comes to what's being taught in schools. They want to introduce involuntary treatment for drug addicts. That's not very libertarian. You know, the government just pulling you off the street and putting you in like a rehab facility against your will doesn't sound very conservative to me. And so you start looking at this and you're like, they're not even actually a conservative party. They're challenging the status quo on every issue. It was just, I think it was a massive failure in branding, and yeah. But I'm shocked that they got as close to winning as they did.
Yeah, they did come really close, even with that branding. But to the point of having faith in elections, like what you said had merit, in that everybody's guaranteed as a citizen of a place to have franchise. But I don't think the number one priority of any election commission or election agency is to guarantee that every single person can have ease of access to that franchise. Like, I'm dead set against telephone voting. I think it's a terrible idea. But like, you should be collecting, if you want to dissuade people from thinking that fraud is happening, like, you want to create the impression of trust in the elections. I would almost argue that that's the number one priority. And you can do that very easily. You can still have absentee, you can still have mail-in, you can still have advanced polling, but you got to have all the votes in by the close of polls on the last day of voting. That will eliminate so much distrust, because if you have this week-long opportunity to generate ballots and you have different numbers for whatever reason, when you put that message out there, people are going to rightly ask questions about that. So you got to have good optics. If you're going to have a week of elections, you have to do it a little bit more smartly. And the polling houses, like here in Saskatchewan, you should not be releasing 5 polls that show the NDP ahead during an election. It's really repulsive to me. It's not honest. Whether it's fraud or not is beside the point. It doesn't look good, and it's not playing the game fair. And I think an election commission that's worth its name should be concerned with how the public perceives it. There's always going to be some segment of the population that thinks cheating's happening and jump right to it to say that the whole thing is fraudulent. I think you got a good point, man. Like, I think it was a very tight election. And I think it's really interesting that those immigrant-heavy areas voted conservative, and it was the most landed, wealthy areas that voted overwhelmingly for the NDP, and they're also the places that are filled with the homeless camp, the drug addiction problem, and it's nuts what they vote for. But I believe they voted for it. I fully believe it. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I
my
mean, Chinese-
specific riding voted for the Greens. I mean, like nobody was cheating for the Greens. You know, it's ridiculous that the people in my riding went that way. I'm ashamed of it. I'm very saddened by it. But it happened. I believe it happened.
You talk to your MLA.
Here's the thing. Here's the funny thing, though. So I got an email. Was it this morning or no? Yesterday, I got an email from a reporter from the Toronto Star requesting an interview because they're reaching out because I'm writing about claims that the BC election was in some way fraudulent, and I came across your YouTube video and an X account, which seemed to raise questions about the election. I'd like to include you in an example. I'm wondering if you'd be open to answering some questions. And I'm worried if I respond to this.
I'd be game for that. That sounds great.
I want to be game, but I'm going to respond, but I want to have the chat recorded because this is the kind of thing where, you know, yeah, I'll be taken out of context. I'm saying a thing that I'm not actually saying. Like right now, I'm saying, and I have been saying this for a while, if you give the appearance of the ability of fraud to occur, and you're insisting on these measures taking place, you're going to look like you're a fraudster. And if it turns out in your favor, people are going to wonder if you rigged it. And like that's
I'd be lying
the reality of it.
I'd be lying if I said like between the 2018 Canadian election, the 2020 US election, and then this last one in BC, that things don't look a little unusual. It looks pretty bad and very strange.
But you're not doing anything wrong. They talk about it being undemocratic to question how your elections are run. I mean, that's how we get better elections. That's how we get tighter elections.
I just don't know how productive questioning the elections are. Like, it's everybody's right to do it, of course. But I think you just have to, at least for myself, for my own sanity, I have to continue on living as if the elections are legitimate.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, you got to just live with it, and they're not gonna. Who's in a position to question it and do an inquiry into it? But the people who are in charge now,
like unless you're an auditor and you're the one going through the votes and you can prove it, or you know you're a forensics person and you're doing an investigation. I don't know how productive it is to question the election.
Beside the point, the Conservative Party of BC is in the best position with all their scrutineers to understand if the election was fair or not. They've signed off on it. It's a dead story. Like, it's over at that point.
Oh yeah. My concern is future elections. Are we going to be going down this road again? Or are we going to be opening it up even further so there's more questions in the future? Or can we get back to, I mean, I gave the example in my video. I talked about it. Taiwan still does paper ballots, and they have what people consider the most secure elections in the world. We should be going
to the most chaotic parliament.
Oh yeah, super chaotic.
But democracy should look. Fist fights. 100%.
I'd love to see
UFC. There was I don't know if you guys. It's kind of a subgenre of interest for me, but I think the world of crypto is just an insane world, and so they actually had influencer fight club. Did you guys hear about this?
No.
Like a bunch of prominent influencers did UFC style fights.
I did see that.
Yeah.
I didn't know it had to do with crypto. It had something to do with crypto?
One of my favorite moments from Canadian politics was Patrick Brazeau going up against Justin Trudeau and getting his face fed by him. I mean, that was amazing. We need more of that in politics. Like, you want to engage the public.
Wasn't Mark Zuckerberg supposed to fight somebody like Elon
Musk?
Did that never happen?
No.
Oh.
Well, I think Zuckerberg's in training. He's gone all martial arts and survival man, from what I understand. So maybe he's getting ready to go at Musk. Maybe.
Well, he was already doing it ahead of time before all of that. Yeah,
we have Mike Tyson and Jake Paul coming up too.
Yeah, that got postponed because Tyson had a ulcer, I guess, that flared up on him, so that he wasn't able.
Like in his 60s, so.
I think he's
Yeah.
57, but man, he looks beast mode. Have you seen his recent videos? Like the definition on his muscles is he's got a young man's body right now. So that's going to be an interesting one.
Muscle memory is the thing that just doesn't go away.
Yeah, the
It's
weirdest thing about Mike Tyson
unbelievable.
too is it seems like he's aging mentally backwards. It seems like he becomes more coherent every day. Like he started off as just, completely like the intelligence of a child, and now all of a sudden he sounds like a genius. It's really interesting, aging backwards.
I'm sufficiently intimidated as a 6'5" man by Mike Tyson that I am not going to say anything bad about him.
No,
yeah.
he's doing great.
Well, he's fantastic. I think he's gonna win. I mean, who's Jake Paul?
Yeah.
I mean, Mike Tyson. He was the best for a reason.
Funny that, like, they rig fights too. See, that's an easy one
Yeah.
to rig because it only
Yeah.
takes two guys. Right?
Mhm.
It's easy to keep a secret between two guys.
And look, to conspire is part of the human condition. Like we conspired to put this stream together when we talked about it privately about getting it together. You know what I mean? Like that's a conspiracy. It's a mild one.
Well, it's not really a conspiracy because we didn't keep it a secret.
I guess not. But like you still had to do. Okay, maybe that's a bad example.
Well, okay, here's another example. The free market. I can't remember who the guy who coined this term, but he said the first thing to be bought and sold in a regulated market is the regulator. So it's the idea that if there's an incentive to pay your way to success, that the people there's a predication to go towards that, and people will try to do that. So if there's a propensity to cheat, people will try to cheat, and there would be a propensity, and people will assume that cheating is occurring.
Well, the first thing to get traded is actually sex, technically.
I said in a regulated market, in the regulated.
No. But this is like in a free market. The first thing, so they did it. I've told you about this, the Capuchin monkey study. So they had 5 monkeys, and they tried to teach them how to use money. So they put them into this plastic enclosure, and they gave them all tokens, and they could exchange the tokens for apples, grapes, or Jell-O. And then they were studying if the monkeys had preferences and if they could figure out how it worked. And as soon as the monkeys figured out how to use the tokens, they started trading them for sex and just started prostituting themselves. So they just forgot all about the food, and then they started gambling. So
wow, our cousins are doing just great without us.
Yeah, it's interesting because they say prostitution's the oldest job in the world, and like the study kind of proves. Yeah, the first thing people will do is sell sex. All right.
Well, I want to thank my guests this evening. Thanks for that. No, honestly, great chat. This is fantastic. First time ever having you, Frank, on the show. I want to encourage everybody to go over your channel. I put the link in the chat. I'll put it in the description as well. Link is in the chat right now as well. I just popped it up again. Get over to the Frank Vaughan channel and give a subscribe because you won't be disappointed. Make sure you hit that notification bell as well. It's very helpful. It tells you when the people you subscribe to actually make new videos, and perhaps when they go live, things like that. So make sure you check that, and you'll have to check it periodically because for some reason YouTube will turn it off if for this reason or that reason. Maybe you talked about recent elections. Maybe that's why they turn these things off. Who knows? But that would be me jumping the gun and jumping to conclusions now, wouldn't it? Now, make sure you're also heading over to Twitter. Subscribe to Frank Vaughan there, or follow Frank Vaughan there, as well as Alex Zoltan. You'll get all kinds of awesome videos, including one that I actually turned into a short today. One of your videos, I grabbed that and put that up on the channel. That was I put a little bit of my own pizzazz to it.
Oh, I loved it. You sped it up. It was great. It was fantastic. Yeah,
nice.
And, give me a follow. I'll try my best to cover that diplomatic spat between the Indians tomorrow. So.
Oh, okay.
Well, you need to keep track of that.
Yeah. I mean, like, we need at least one independent journalist there. So just keep everybody honest. So it'll be fun. It'll be interesting. Thanks so much, Frank. It was great chatting with you and meeting you.
Yeah, it was awesome. We'll do it again sometime.
Before we go, I got one more super chat that I wanted to get to. Gordon Hoffernan for $5 said it turns into good night. Oh, hold on, I'll just pop this up. It turned into good against evil, and the left became unhinged, and they were never like this 20 years ago. No. This is taught in I believe. This is okay. I'm dyslexic, so I have a hard time with sentences with typos.
I think Gordon is too. No, I mean that in the nicest way possible. I think I understand what Gordon's saying here, and I agree. Yeah, they definitely gone a little crazy. One flew over the cuckoo's nest.
It's not really liberalism anymore. Like I often think that myself. 20 years ago, I would have identified much more liberal, and I'm reluctant to label myself anything. But whatever that is, whatever the left is right now, that is not who I am.
So the way I have always liked to describe it is the right used to be in the mental institution, and the left was in the middle, and it just shifted over. Now, like the right is in the middle, and the left has shifted to the mental institution. And so.
I just love liberty, and I'll always fight for liberty, and that's my position.
Yeah, I mean, I think most
whether the left or the right's fighting for it.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at. Anyway, ladies and gents, I want to thank you for joining the stream tonight, and we'll see you guys all Monday morning. Everybody, keep on trucking.